Hello, and welcome to the Perfect Franchise Podcast.
I'm Kris, and joining me is my wonderful co-host, Andrea.
In this podcast, we're on a mission to help you discover all that franchising has to offer.
We'll explore expert strategies, interview successful franchise owners, and give you the tools to make informed decisions.
So whether you're considering your options or you're ready to take that plunge, we're here to support you every step of the way.
So let's jump into today's episode.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the TPF podcast. Today, Andrea, I think this is our fifth episode of the Expert Insights. Yeah, so today is TPF Expert Insights with two TPF experts. We have today Emily Anderson and David Floyd, very experienced franchise consultants here with TPF. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to see you guys.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, we always like these ones, Kris. This is always fun when we get our colleagues on and we can ask them really hard questions, right? Put them on the spot. Yeah, make them squirm. Great. Well, guys, today we're going to talk a little bit about the model, the franchise model. We talk a lot on the podcast, and even when we're on the brands, we dive into, operation ownership models, right? We talk about semi-absentee, owner operator. We're going to pivot a little bit today, and we may get back into that, but I want to talk about the operations models. So the differences between these franchises, not just your time commitment. So to help our audience understand, what does it mean when we talk about the franchise operation model?
So I'm guessing we're talking about businesses that have recurring revenue versus businesses that commonly, have a higher than average transaction, but it's more kind of a one and done. When you meet with a customer or a client, you do a job, it's not going to be an ongoing revenue stream.
Yep, that's exactly it. And I think, when we talk, recurring revenue, that's a concept people say, yeah, I want recurring revenue, but they have to know it may be a little bit of a longer runway, right? To build up that membership, to bring people in. And so I think that's definitely a good thing to chat about so that our audience knows what's the difference between these as I think about these models.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's usually two different ways you go, right? Oftentimes with recurring revenue models, it's things like cleaning, window washing, right? These are services that yard service, right? Things that people are hiring you to do, and you're doing them on a regular basis, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, right? Those are great because as you build your clientele, your business grows over time, right? So you start with 50 customers, then you have 100, and then you have 200, right? And so your business just continues to grow as long as you keep your existing customers happy. It can sometimes take a little bit longer to ramp those businesses because it's your typical service is going to be lower ticket, right? So if I'm getting a house clean, maybe it's $100, right? Versus if I'm selling something, maybe that's several $1,000s. So to ramp that revenue can take a little bit longer, but once you have that business built, you've got this annuity, if you will, of clients that are paying you on a regular basis versus a model that's more transactional where, yes, your ticket might be higher, your growth might be a little bit faster, but you don't have that same recurring nature to it. Although sometimes that can be offset. Most of those models, what you want to try to do is establish referral sources so that you've got regular referral sources that are sending you business on a regular basis. So it's not a true recurring revenue model, but you're also kind of building in that pipeline of revenue in that type of model as well.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. I mean, it's a big difference, right? If you're in a lawn care business, what are you charging? $100 a visit? Like, so that's it. But you can also be in a cabinet replacement business where your average ticket is $25,000, right? So I think it's a pretty big difference, right? The ramp up for that cabinet business is going to be much faster. But, what I think we all teach our clients is that, as somebody once said, I can't remember who, there are no perfect solutions. There's only trade-offs. And when you're picking a business, it's always a trade-off. You want that faster ramp. You want your average customer to spend 25 grand with you. Great. Not going to be recurring, right? You want the recurring. So 5 years from now, you know exactly how much money you're making before you get out of bed every day. Great. But you're going to have to wait 2, 3, 4 years to get there. It's a whole different mentality, right?
And Dave, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about a business that has a higher transaction. Build those referral partnerships, because I think sometimes people shy away from businesses that have a higher average transaction. They like the idea that they might be able to ramp up faster, but in their head, they're thinking that they're going to need to hunt for every client that they get. But if you build those referral partnerships with other professionals, they can be referring back to you, and you can just kind of rely on that. It doesn't mean we necessarily get to sit on our hands, but it helps. So you don't have to be that hunter necessarily.
Yeah, we have businesses in our portfolio where, you hear after 3 years or more, a lot of, even 50% of their businesses become more of that referral repeat business, not repeat customer, but repeat coming from that same source. And I think that that's something, they're not all like that, but there's that opportunity. If you're really good at sort of building those connections, providing a really good service, that's where you can really bring some of those back in. So I think that's great.
Yeah. As we talk about the different revenue streams, it makes me think that a lot of times, one of the things clients do when they come into the process is they focus on what the business does or what the business offers, right? When in reality, more of the match comes from how the business operates. So Emily, you want to talk to those listening and watching kind of the difference, what we're talking about there and why that's so important, because without guidance, it's a common mistake.
Right.
Almost everybody would make. So mind elaborating?
Yeah. And, an example that I often give my clients, and as silly as this sounds, it's always about transferable skills. And I'll use the example of a Supercuts owner. The owner of a Supercuts should not even know how to cut hair. They should be focusing on executing the operations of the business. And that might be leadership, that might be financial management, that might be growing and scaling a business. And so I think a common mistake I see people make is feeling like they need to understand every nuance of the business. Like, oh gosh, if I'm going to own a Supercuts, I better learn how to cut hair. No. Franchises and successful businesses are not built and are not reliant on the owner being able to jump in and pinch hit. You know what I mean? So really focus on the operations that you as the owner need to execute. So in other words, as the owner, are you the person that needs to go out and build those referral partnerships that we were alluding to? Are you the person that needs to be tracking the leads, the conversions, the average ticket price, the margins, et cetera, leadership? And just about every business is going to need some type of operation, some type of leadership, some types of business development. But of those roles, which role do you as the owner want to fulfill? What hat do you want to wear? It doesn't matter what industry it is. It doesn't matter what kind of widget or service it is. It's focusing on the execution that you as the owner are going to do and fulfill.
Yeah, I know. I would say, this is probably, I probably have used this example before here on the podcast, but the easiest one is, I'll have folks, it's rough times out there if you're coming from the IT industry, right? A lot of layoffs, right? So we have IT folks, they naturally want to look at IT franchises.
Yeah.
And not to stereotype, I don't want any IT professionals get mad at me, but the majority of them aren't always the strongest when it comes to sales, right? And so if you're looking at what the business does, what it offers, IT's perfect for them. If we look at how the business operates, it's very often not a match, because IT franchises will typically require some of the most serious sales ability and sales efforts by the owner of the franchise, and they don't expect that, right? So,
That's exactly right.
Well put.
I had a client yesterday with that exact same thing. Yeah. What was that?
I think, one of the biggest mistakes small business owners tend to make that are not franchisees is that they are the technician in their own business, right? And when you do it, when you operate the business that way, you can never grow the business beyond yourself, because the business is dependent upon your labor, right? If you're the baker, you can only grow the business as big as much bread as you can bake, right? And what franchising really does is it teaches people not to be the technician, not to work in the business, as we say, but to work on the business. You're the leader. You're helping the business to grow. You're helping it to scale. You're hiring the people who are going to do the work. In a lot of cases, when you own a supercuts, you're hiring the people to cut the hair, right? You're providing the leadership. And that's what franchising really does. And that enables people to scale and grow beyond themselves and to grow large businesses with multiple locations and big revenue, as opposed to small businesses where you're trapped as the operator.
Yeah, and it creates the value in the business too. When you turn around and sell it, you're not relying on yourself. You're relying on this business that you built in scale. And I think that that's really important versus if you're the person in doing it, it's gonna be really hard. You have to replace yourself. And that's much harder than selling to another business owner that can come in. So I think that's really important. That's great. So let's kind of pivot a little and let's talk about, our clients go through a process where we say you're validating, and you're validating with the leadership team. You're also validating with existing franchisees, and you should be sort of diving in. And that's part of this is we're going to take that first step of matching you to a model, right? Where we think this is kind of that first layer of, I think this makes sense. Now do your due diligence and validate. So oftentimes candidates come in and they think validation means I just want to see what the financials are. I don't want to listen to anything else about the business. There's a lot more to it. So what should they be evaluating in the model besides just looking at the numbers?
So validation is my favorite part of the research process. And that's when they're speaking with other people that own the very same franchise that they're looking to join. And have a really transparent, candid conversation with people that own and operate this business and get a sense of operationally, what does a day in the life of the owner look like? How many hours are you typically spending on the business? How do tell me about your customer acquisition? Because the franchisor is going to provide a really foundational understanding of the business, but talking to people that are in this business on a daily basis, whether they've been in the business for 6 months or 6 years, can give you a deeper understanding, provide some nuance. But also, what I value about validation is my clients hear consistency. So I'm consistently hearing that this is about how much time I would need in the business. I'm consistently hearing this on the financial return. And essentially what that can do is it can provide some level of predictability. If I relate to these people that own this business that I'm talking to, and this is what is consistent for them, I can pretty much expect that if I do what they do, I'm going to get what they get. And I think that helps people sleep at night, if you will. It helps people plan, financially forecast, but also just mentally understand this is what my life could look like. And is this the life I want to lead for myself? I don't think anybody woke up one morning and said, when I grow up, I really want to own a franchise. But oftentimes they want more flexibility to go to their kids' games. They want to be able to travel, put their kids through college. And validation, speaking with owners, can see, hey, am I going to get that autonomy and flexibility for a financial return that I'm looking for? It's a good starting point.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, as someone who's been through the process myself and invested in a couple of franchises, it was by far the most impactful part of the process, right? You can talk to the franchise representatives, you can read an FDD. It's all theory until you start actually talking to franchisees. And then you really learn, what is it really like to run this business? And you learn the good, you learn the bad, you learn everything in between. And you want to know that before you make an investment in a franchise. And I think another thing it helps people do is when you talk to these franchisees, what you're going to realize is they're just like you. Most of them came out of corporate America. They'd never run a business before, right? And now they're doing it and they're having success because it's a big leap for people to go from corporate America to business owner. And when you start to talk to other people who have also done this and made that transition successfully, that have a background like yourself, you go, okay, maybe I can do this myself too and have success. So it gives you a lot of that confidence to move forward.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, David, because I think people go into the validation. They've learned everything about the franchise on paper. It's all theory. Sounds great. It also sounds perfect. And then they start talking to franchisees and newsflash, it's not perfect. I think they're always kind of hopeful, like, oh, now I'm going to get the next level of detail by talking to the franchise. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you get a clear idea of the financials or this or that. But I think overwhelmingly, the biggest benefit that they pull away is just these kind of soft things that are really important. Like, and I mean this in the nicest way, they've talked to franchisees, as you described, and people that are just like them, but they're also not any better than them. They didn't come with a secret advantage. Well, they were in a very similar industry, or they had a network of people that I don't have. There's nothing there. So they walk away ultimately going, you know what? Those were nice people. They were smart people. I'm nice. I'm smart. They could do it. I could do it. It's really sometimes that simple, right? I will also say, and this may be a little controversial, I think one of the big mistakes people make is they have this bright idea where they say, I want to talk to top performers, I want to talk to middle of the road performers, and I want to talk to their worst performers.
All the time.
And you can go ahead, but I can tell you right now that talking to the worst performers is not going to do anything that you think it's going to do, because everywhere in your life, whatever job you have right now, whatever job you had before, you did really well, you advanced, you got promoted. There were also people that got that job that washed out, right? And so asking those people why they washed out when you succeeded, it doesn't help. What you want to do is talk to performers that are in the top 50%, or maybe top 40, top 30. Because if you don't feel like you're going to be in the top 50%, you shouldn't buy the franchise. Right? So you're looking again for that. Am I like them? Am I like them? It's kind of, I know it sounds kind of touchy feely and not very analytical, but super important, I think.
It is. And I think if you hit on the point that Emily made, the example she gave with the IT professionals, they're like, I just want to go into IT. They're probably not somebody that's strong at sales. You're going to find that out in validation. Is there a portion of this that I didn't think going into it that I maybe need to be heavier in B2B sales to build up? We talked about the big ticket items. You have to build that referral relationship. Are they comfortable with that? That's some of the things that you dive into when you try to figure out what is my role. And that's something that's part of the 6-factor analysis we give our clients. Make sure to ask that, and make sure to ask, okay, who's come in the business and did really well and why did they do well? Who's come in and hasn't done well and why? And you're trying to figure out, do I fit? Is this the right operational model for me? Right? That's really important part of the validation.
Yeah, my experience too, talking to clients, is when they do speak with someone who's maybe struggling in the business, it's usually pretty obvious why. I hear that all the time. I talk to this person, they aren't following the system. They don't have the right personality, right? It's usually pretty evident why someone is struggling. And most of the time it's because they're not following the plan. They're trying to do things their own way. It's the worst thing that you can do as a franchisee, but it happens. So again, are you you like that person who's struggling, or are you like the person that's really having a lot of success, right? And I think if you're like that person who's doing well, very high probability you're going to do well as well.
Agreed. So very related to these topics is a lot of times we'll talk to clients, and when you really get down to what's the real motivation, what are the real end results we'd be going for if you find the right franchise and it's going to be successful, what are we really chasing here? A lot of times they'll use words like legacy, right? They want to pass it down. And that almost always, to me at least, implies scalability. The business can scale. So how do you guys think about scaling? Are all franchises created equal? Are there certain categories that lend themselves to scaling easier? Or how should a client think about that if that's ultimately what's going to be important to them?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of different factors to consider. Franchises commonly scale in a pretty modular way, if you will, when it comes to acquiring additional territory. If it's a service-based business, meaning your business is providing a service where you go out to the client, you go to the customer, whether it's their home or their place of business, when you scale, you acquire the rights to additional territory to own, control, and to serve. But generally, you don't have a lot more additional capital going out, at least not initially. You can still start with a small team of employees and kind of strategically grow into your empire. But if it's a retail location and there's brick and mortar, and you start with one location and there's a build out, et cetera, and then you scale, Commonly, as you acquire additional territory, there's going to be another build out, and there's going to be another build out. Now, I'm not saying that one is right, wrong, good, or bad, but it's important to understand the amount of capital that you're going to need to put out as you scale. And I found in my experience, it's also important to get your fund. If you know you're going to scale, if you know you're going to do multiple territories, then your funding strategy for multiple territories might be different than your funding strategy for a single. And so these are things that I'm sure you guys talk to your clients about. We've got the short term, we've got the long term. Can this business provide what you're looking to achieve in both?
David, anything to add there? Or did Emily say
No,
it all?
I think Emily really nailed it. I think it's one of the biggest differences between a service brand and a retail brand, right? And retail is more expensive to scale in most cases than home services, but oftentimes it gives you more flexibility. So kind of like you said, Kris, there's no right or wrong. There's just trade-offs, and which type of model is right for you depends on your goals and how actively involved you want to be, and a lot of other variables. And I think that's where we can help you to understand those things and think through them and try to put you and guide you into the model that makes the most sense for you.
Yeah, I think that's the point. Like, that's where we talk about, we said we have sort of the franchise operation model and the ownership model. That's one where you get into the retail, where that ownership model really kind of impacts. Most of the people kind of looking at retail are looking to be semi-absentee, part-time. And so, yes, it's going to be a higher cost of entry, but you don't have to be there for the day-to-day operations as much. You're hiring someone. So that's where there's sort of that overlap of figuring out what makes sense. What's your goals? Where are you trying to get to? Is a little bit of a longer runway for you? Then great. Then you sort of you scale by adding different locations on, and then that ultimately ends up being a larger business. But you just have to kind of figure that out. And that's why we sort of dig in and ask those questions with our clients a lot.
Now, I want to ask you guys a question. I know we're kind of my approach.
Is that allowed?
Wait a minute.
It is now, because I
don't know.
How do you like that? So what is your approach when you're working with a client and they say, okay, I ultimately want to own multiple territories, 3, 5, but I'm going to start with one. I'm going to see how this works. And then maybe next year I'll acquire more territory. Everybody's nodding their heads. Okay, so how do you guys address this? I'm curious.
Andrea, go for it.
Where do you live? That's going to be a big piece. I know that sounds crazy, but if you live in Dallas, Atlanta, Raleigh, Charlotte, like, it's going to be hard for you to come back around. It's just those fast growing areas make it a challenge. And so I understand the people that say, I want to wait and see. I think the cost typically of buying another license isn't significant. And so part of it is I think David made this point of, where are you trying to get to? So it's kind of like, start with the end in mind. What's your goal financially? How many years do you want to own? Where are you trying to, is this a legacy you're passing down? Are you looking to build it up and sell it? I think that's going to really help you figure out the scalability and how many territories or units make sense for you. And oftentimes it is going to be, it's hard to go back into an area, because then you're stuck and you're like, I really wanted to move here, but it's already sold. So that's what's challenging. So you really have to start with that end in mind of, where am I trying to get to? What's my ultimate goal? And then what do I need to do now so I make sure I'm growing to that point? Yeah. I don't know, Kris, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, you're right on. It depends on the market. It also depends on the specific franchises. Some franchises, we're very aware, are just growing very quickly. They're a freight train, and you got to know that. So I never try to influence my clients one way or the other. I just want them to know the pros and cons either way. And so, listen, you can buy one territory, hope that other territories are remaining a year from now. You can do that. We all know what the downside is. They might not be there. And if they're not there, how will you feel and what would you do? Should we look at other franchises then? You just want to have a plan B. The other alternative is you can, buy the first franchise, pay franchise fees for maybe 2 more, and own the rights to eventually 3. What's the worst case scenario there? You decide you don't want to open up the second and third. A lot of franchises will let you sell those territories and make that money back. Not everybody, but a lot of them will. So there's mitigating the risk there. Worst case scenario, you can't sell those territories. You lose those, essentially what they are, deposits. What's the right answer? I'm not here to tell my clients that. As I've learned to say, I don't have the answers. What I have are the questions, and we'll make sure they're asking the right questions. They have all the information, and then it's a very personal decision.
So, I know we kind of started this out by talking about the ownership model. And I think let's sort of end a little bit there and dive into it. And we hit on it just briefly with the recurring revenue, the higher ticket items. So a couple of things around that I'd love to kind of dive into is there a difference from sort of an exit strategy? And Dave, this might be a good one for you. We've owned one of each, right? And we've exited. And then is there a type of client that should go one direction or another?
I think from an exit strategy, recurring revenue models, I think, tend to be more valuable, right? When you're going to sell a business, and as you said, we've done this twice. If you can sell a customer base, right, that's really loyal to that business, I think that's super valuable. One of the great things about the businesses that we own a cleaning business, we own a hair salon business. None of those clients really knew me, right? If someone was going out to clean their house, that's who they had the relationship with, right? I was just the person they met the first time. I talked to them occasionally, but their relationship was really with that team that was going out to clean their house. The hair salon business, they don't care about me. I own the salon. They care about the person that's cutting their hair, right? So when you go to sell that business, I would guess our clients never knew that business sold, right? Because the people that they were in contact with didn't change, right? And so I do think there's value. The more that you're involved in the business and the more that you're key and critical to that business, the harder it's going to be to sell it. So as much as possible as an owner, you want to empower your employees to take on that role so that when you exit, it doesn't affect the sales price. And I think different models, it's easier to do than other models, but especially if your long-term goal is, say, I want to build this up and sell it, you want to think about that when you're evaluating models. How easy is it going to be for me to step out of that client-facing role when the time comes to sell the business?
Emily, any additional thoughts on that piece?
No, I mean, I agree 100%. I think commonly when there's a business that has a higher transaction that's not recurring revenue, that is commonly something that is a fit for somebody who says, financially, I need a fast ramp up. I don't have time to wait to get, 500 clients and recurring revenue. I need to ramp up fast financially for whatever reason. And so typically a business that has a higher transaction is what's going to make more sense for them. But in terms of equity and long-term value, like what Dave said, those recurring revenue tends to make more sense. It just depends on the individual, their short and long-term goals.
And I'd say there's mitigating strategies too, right? So if you are in a business that's got a higher transaction cost, if you've got these referral partners, part of what you're going to do when you sell that business is you're going to stay in that business for a while. You're going to help to transition those relationships to the new owners, that when you step out, that referral business is still coming in. So there's always things that you can mitigate, but I think it's all factors to consider when you're thinking about the type of model that makes the most sense for you.
Andrea, I think we're going to run out of time. So
yeah, we're going to run out of time. I know we had so many great things here. I mean, I think we always ask all the clients those sort of rapid fire questions, but I think we didn't hit on the one piece. So let's end with that one that I mentioned. So is there a particular client that makes sense for a recurring revenue business versus sort of that ramp? So we talked a little bit about, how quickly they want to get there. When I think recurring revenue, there's some people where maybe certain age bracket where they maybe should look at that. So anybody want to hit on that a little bit? Because I think it's important as we kind of round out this podcast.
I think kind of what you're referring to is what's your time horizon, right? Is someone who's a retiree who says, hey, I've got 5 years left and I want this to be my sort of last act, right? Okay, if that's where you are, you probably want something that's going to ramp faster. So maybe that business with the higher ticket is going to be a better fit, right? Versus someone that says, hey, I've got 10 or 15 years. I want to build this thing. I want to grow it over time. I've got some time to wait to build and scale that recurring revenue business. Then that might be a model that's a better fit for them. So I think a lot of it just depends on where do you want to go and how quickly do you want to get there? And that can help dictate in a lot of ways what type of model might be the best fit.
That's great. Thank you. I think that's really sort of what I wanted to hit on too. And it's not always 100% that way, because it depends. You're going to pass it down as a legacy. But if you're sort of, to your point, building it up and you're looking sort of for that retirement plan, you're looking to turn around, sell it, and that's your money. Like, there's different ways to really do it. And I think that's why it's important to work with someone like us, and let's map that out. What's your goals? What's your next 5-10 years? What are you good at? That's all goes back to sort of this model of what makes sense. What's the right operational model for you to sort of build this out? And so thank you, both of you, for coming on. I always love doing these podcasts. And to Kris's point, we ran out of time. We had a lot more questions, didn't we, Kris? We're going to have to have these two back. I know Dave loves coming on. I have him in the house, so I can ask him to come on anytime. Like, come on, jump in. So it's great. So I appreciate it. So thanks. So for those of you listening, if you're thinking about franchising, remember that while there's no one size fits all, the perfect franchise for you is definitely out there. To explore your options, visit theperfectfranchise.com by clicking on Let's Talk. Schedule a call with one of the consultants at the Perfect Franchise team. We look forward to connecting with you again on our next episode. Until then, take care.